And I told her I want to be managing director by the time I'm 30. And she laughed at me. And she said, well, that's a ridiculous thing to say. That's never going to happen. And I did it. So by the time I was 30, I did. I was then a managing director of an agency. You can lead without trust or rapport, but it will be short-lived. People will do things if they're scared. People will do things if they're threatened. People will do things under pressure, but they won't sustain it.
That's
so for
true.
me, that's not leadership. To be someone, to be a people-led leader, a human leader, to balance humanism and capitalism never means make less money. We're talking about making money. We're talking about growth. But we know that when you have connected leaders who listen to their team, who are engaged with their people, they see 23% higher profit.
Did you learn more from women leaders or from men leaders?
Do you know what, if I'm being really honest? Sorry, ladies. I think I learned most of it from male leaders. You'll hear people talk about soft skills, right? I'm like on a mission, Lara, to tell the world they are not soft, right? There is nothing soft about them. These are hard skills that have hard impact. When we're talking about empathy in this case, this is not about being nice. It's not about being sympathetic. It's not about being kind. I mean, please be kind, but it's not about that. It's about giving people the skills to influence other humans.
And we're on the C-Suite Influence podcast, episode 6, where we talk to regional leaders about their day-to-day journeys, about what makes them leaders as they are. And today we're talking to Mimi Nicklin, who is an empathy advocate, who is also a best-selling author of the book called Softening the Edge. Yeah, hi Mimi, she's in the studio here doing it with me. And we're talking leadership today because Mimi has been in a number of really great leadership roles apart from leading her own company. Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you for having me back. It's always a highlight, and I'm so excited we got to get this in the diary and have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
So we're talking leadership today.
We are.
We're talking leadership, we're talking, all the new era of how leaders can create their own impact virtually and in person as well. So, and definitely empathy. So we can't skip the empathy conversation.
Never.
So, Mimi, you've been in a number of leadership roles throughout your career. Apart from advocating for empathy now in a number of years, you are also doing, you're leading your own company and you've been an employed leader before. So you were working for someone as a leader. Yeah. Can you tell me about your journey? Maybe what roles did you do and how did you come to a leadership role? Was it always a natural thing for you?
I think it was. I think people always ask, are leaders born or made? And I think the answer is probably both. But for me, for sure, I was kind of born to be this way. And I look at my little girl today who's 6, and I think she's exactly the same. My mum will tell me stories from when I was very small, 4 or 5 years old, when I would be at a party surrounded by adults where, their party, my parents' party, where I would be busy leading all the grown-ups, to get their food and sit here. And, so I think for me, I was always born with this innate passion for people, and when I look at my work today, which is very much, as you mentioned there, ingrained in empathetic leadership and emotional intelligence in the workplace, I think a lot of that is in me, right? So in my case, yes, I think I was kind of born a leader, which I always remember Sheryl Sandberg saying originally that little girls would have been called bossy before, right, when they led. But so, yes, on the one hand, I was born very comfortable with people, always being able to confront, communicate, lead, I guess. But on the other hand, I had great training. So I knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. I knew I wanted to be in the creative industries. I went into advertising straight from university. In fact, I chose my degree so I could go into advertising, which is also quite rare in that industry. My father was an ad man. So that, again, that kind of industry leadership was in my family. But I was very lucky. I worked in some really big global brands. That was my vision as a young starter, right, when I was a graduate. Yeah. And my father had told me that In fact, it's quite funny, Lara, because as I said, he worked in advertising and he always gave me two pieces of advice. The first was don't go into advertising. So clearly I ignored that because it's exactly where I went. But the second was if you do, and I was in London at the time, go and work for a Procter & Gamble related agency. So Procter & Gamble is one of the world's biggest consumer goods companies. They have like Pantene and Pampers and those types of things. And he said to me, they will train you. You know, don't necessarily go and work for one of the really creative startup fun businesses. Go and work on those big brands where they will train you in leadership and creativity and process. So as I say, I think I was probably born to be good with people, but I got brilliant training as I went up the ranks. And that did allow me to lead at a young age. So I think a little bit of nature and a little bit of nurture.
I was actually going to ask you, how long was your journey to the first leadership position? And and what leader were you at the first role, and then how did it evolve?
Well, I think leadership is such a wide word.
Yeah.
I always remember, and I have a feeling it might be on my LinkedIn page from literally like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when LinkedIn was really a small platform. But I always remember when I was in my first job, I was probably 23 or something. And I got given this event to run as part of a P&G client. Yeah. It was very glamorous. It was a beauty event. It was in central London. I remember it was in like a glass box, like the event venue was this beautiful glass box in Mayfair. So in the richest part of London. Yeah. And I was entirely overwhelmed, but my job was to run it. And I always remember that when I got to the end of the event and the boss of my team, who I thought was this superhero woman, right? She did the thanks at the end of the event, and she looked at me and she said, in the audience, she said, I want to thank Mimi. And I was the junior of the junior who has shown leadership well beyond her years, right? So I think leadership can be in such small ways. I was just organising an event. Yeah. That's all I was doing, making sure that the breakfast and the lunch was there and the stage was set up. So as I said, I think leadership starts with people. And for me, that journey began in all the small things I did. I always, innately took on that responsibility to make sure that everybody was okay and working in a system. But I also remember in that same job that there was another female leader in the business. It was a big business. I think it was about 250 people in that office, who was the absolute opposite from the first leader. And I remember telling her, she asked me, I was so young, Lara, and she asked me, what do you want to do? What's your vision? Yeah. And I told her, I want to be managing director by the time I'm 30. And she laughed at me. And she said, well, that's a ridiculous thing to say. That's never going to happen. And it was one of the only times I've ever cried in the workplace, like in my career. And I remember standing in a stairwell calling my dad, and him just, saying to me, well, don't listen to anybody else. This is your first leadership lesson. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Go and do what, you do you, as it were. And I did it. So by the time I was 30, I did. I was then a managing director of an agency at 30. And I continued like that. So I was always very young in my roles. And I know that was because of my skills with people, which is so much of leadership. The technicality of it. Obviously, you have to know how to do the job. But I think I was always given a lot of leeway in catching up with the how, because I was able to lead the people that were very good at the how. So, yeah, I was young. I was young, and that continued. When I eventually arrived in Dubai years later, I was young in that role too, So I always just kind of embraced knowing what I knew, which was how to manage the people, and everything else will come,
So you define, let's say, a leader, like one of the, for you, being a leader means being able to understand people, or being able to, what is it good? How do you define being good to people? And is everyone who's good to people becoming a leader? Or is there anything else? Are there any other things that are associated with this leadership journey? Yes.
Such good questions, Lara. I think to answer the second one, is everybody that's good with people a leader? No, for sure. You will find people that are brilliant with people who are in an operational role or an administrative role. They're never necessarily going to become I guess, the more traditional definition of a leader running a whole team. But as I said earlier, in their roles, they are able to lead in some way. But yes, how I define leadership would be in someone who is able to understand others in order to take them from point A to point B, right? Fundamentally, leadership, whether you're in a business role, you're in a military role, you're in a social or community role, to lead is to take people somewhere, right? That's what fundamentally we're doing. So I believe that is based on understanding, because how are you ever going to take anybody anywhere if you don't understand how they want to get there, right? Or if you don't understand them enough to build rapport, to build a relationship so that they follow or come with you or alongside you, you know? So yeah, for me, I think leadership is so multidimensional.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it is about the rallying of people together to move from, you know, point A to point B, to create that journey together. And I do believe, as you said, that understanding, empathy, I guess, but relationships are core to that. You can lead without relationships. You can lead without trust or rapport, but it will be short-lived, right? Because people will do things if they're scared. People will do things if they're threatened. People will do things under pressure, but they won't sustain it.
That's
so for
true.
me, you know, that's not leadership. That's just, you know, autocracy, right? It's mandatory. But actual leadership is something that grows over time.
That's interesting. Has your leadership style, let's say, evolved once you went on a journey of advocating for empathy? First, I think there was a point when you realized that empathy is something that you would like to advocate going forward, probably within the years. Has anything changed in you as a leader since then?
Yeah, like I think, you know, I think it's a really interesting day to have this conversation because yesterday, literally yesterday, I had a conversation with one of my family members and I said, I think I finally found my confidence, right? Which is ridiculous. If you look at my social media, you're saying, no, clearly you've had it for 5 years. I've always been a confident leader, but something switched in me just in the last month, Lara, really, where maybe it's not confidence, maybe it's just comfort.
Yeah.
I'm really sure of how I'm leading now, how and who and why. And I think that took until now. And you read that a lot in the media, right? You read a lot of women who say, oh, I got to my late 30s or my 40s, or even now, my 50s or my 60s, until I found really who I am and to be in that flow state, as it were. And literally yesterday, I said to this person, I think I'm in it, you know? So I've been leading for 15 years and I'm always confident. I love what I do. My teams follow me and we've been great teams, but yes, it has changed. And I think it's changed because it takes time to find that. You know, it takes time to really build that energy and that momentum to say, I know what I'm doing, you know, and I can do that without second guessing. And I think as women, we second guess a lot, right? You'll read about imposter syndrome like in every social media platform. I'm not sure if it's imposter syndrome or just, as I said, whether it's confidence or comfort or flow state, whatever it is. I feel like only now I've truly hit it. And as I'm doing that, everything else is coming, you know? Yeah. So I do think that leadership is a destination and we all find it at different times.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like this really, really important message that, first of all, it takes time, but I mean, it doesn't mean it has to stop you, right? So you grow in every single role that you're doing. You probably learn some lessons. It's just a journey, constant journey. I mean, I like also the fact that you've been absolutely confident about the goal, right? You knew
where you're going.
That you wanted to be a director or a managing director. So you wanted to be somebody who motivates people to come together, right? Yeah. A question to you. So you mentioned trainings, right? You said you had an opportunity to get really great trainings. Did you learn more from women leaders or from men leaders?
Do you know what, if I'm being really honest, sorry, ladies, I think I learned most of it from male leaders. I had some phenomenal female leaders in my career, but I also always had this sense that they weren't as authentic. And again, lots has changed in the last 10 years. But in those first, I guess, 10 years of my career, that those female leaders were never quite as authentic as they could have been in their roles. And I always believed, especially because I was in the advertising industry for most of my career. I always said to people, first of all, two things. First of all, I won't leave, right? Because many, many women would leave. It's quite a tough industry in terms of hours, and they leave when they have kids. I understand why. So I always said, number one, I won't leave. And number two, when, not if, but when I become, the boss of these businesses that I'm going to future lead, I won't stop being who I am. I won't stop being feminine in my role. I watched so many female leaders come into these big, huge meetings that we would have all around the world in their power suits and their blazers. And they were very strong and firm. And I always, Lara, I never wanted to do that. I didn't want to lead like that. And we have to remember that a lot of this conversation around empathy and emotional intelligence and mindfulness and mental health and flexibility, this is new, all of it. It feels old, but it's not, it's new. It's like the last 5 years. For most of my career, that was not an option, but yet I did it anyway. I didn't care, right? I wanted to be kind to people. I reached goals and we won awards and we turned around businesses and all of those hard results. We achieved all of them. But I didn't want to do it by being a bully or by being, overly aggressive or making myself more masculine to do that. So I felt that most of my female leaders in those years had to do that, or they felt they had to. And in that way, I've had some phenomenal male bosses around me who I've learned from. And again, probably not the more human skills, but certainly political skills, right? That's,
right.
How to navigate a room, how to manage stakeholders, how to position bad news, all of those types of things. Certainly, yeah, that was on the job training, and I learned from some amazing men.
If you look back, or probably currently, who would you consider to be one of your biggest mentors on the leadership journey, let's say? It could be a public figure.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Look, it's always really hard for me because I moved a lot in my career. So I've, on the whole, every 3 years for 17 years, I've moved, mainly with my roles. So I've been in Asia, Middle East for my entire career. I mean, I started in London, as I mentioned, but after 4 years I was gone and I never went back, and I never will. So it's hard because I changed leadership teams so often. They kept sending me to different countries and teams. So I never really had that consistent mentor or leader in my life. But I would say that my dad had a big role in that. I still today, I not look at how he is now. Now he's a retired gentleman, but who he was and how he addressed things. I found great consistency in that. But I also found great consistency in my own compass. I really believe that if you connect to what is right and wrong, you know what the answer is. You don't need to learn from someone else.
For sure.
So, and the second thing I would always say, Lara, is that I always tell my team that big problems solve themselves. And they're always like, what? I don't understand. That every time in my career that I was overwhelmed by the bigness of a problem or the challenge of a team or a resignation or whatever was going on, I would reserve the right to not fix it now.
Okay.
And just say, you know what? By tomorrow or the next day, we will be further along than we are now in making this decision. And it is so true. So if you've got a big problem or a big challenge, give it air, give it time. And in that, I found great peace, but also great progress in terms of giving yourself the time to learn. Because if you don't always have a mentor to learn from, you need time, right? People ask me, what are your secrets to leadership? I always say patience and tenacity. We're all in such a rush.
If you were to choose between, let's say, giving it a time or, like, for example, imagine you're under pressure of a high performance.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably had situations like that. And how would you overcome this particular necessity or the need to actually try and solve it because of the performance purposes versus, giving it time, not fixing it now? Because leaders, in a lot of cases, they're perfectionists. Like they want to demonstrate
Yeah.
They want to demonstrate that they've done something right now, right there to troubleshoot, right?
Yeah.
How do you overcome that? And have you ever faced a challenge like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we face it all the time. But again, I mean, listen, there are times when problems have to be solved now. They're time sensitive, or there's a deadline or a delivery or a process or an approval, right? So I'm not saying you never have to make decisions in the moment. Of course you do. But I think more often than not, our belief that we need to create action is bigger than the reality of that action, right? And often acknowledgement of that issue or challenge is a far more efficient process than the delivery of the solution to that problem. So I think you're right. Many people feel that they need to act now, and they define their success, their confidence, their ego, their status by that speed. But, you know, when I was about 23, I remember one of these female leaders that I greatly respected. She told me, Mimi, the greatest leadership lesson I can give you is that the best of leaders have comfort in silence. And I remember thinking, that doesn't make any sense, right? I don't understand why this amazing, confident woman is telling me that my greatest success secret is to not use my voice, right? And it took me a long time to really work that out and understand what she was saying to me, which comes back to what I was just saying, which is give problems, give people, give conversation and challenges room to breathe, hear them. You know, in that, two things happen. Number one, either your team will solve it themselves, right? People need to be heard. So when they have a challenge or a barrier, they will often come to you and look to you to solve it. But if you look back at them to explain it, they will solve it, right? And then they'll leave your office like, oh, thanks, that's great. And you think, I didn't do anything, but okay, good, right? So give people opportunity to fix problems. It is far quicker to give them the skills to solve those problems than for me to always try and solve them for them, right? So that's the first thing. But as I said, the second thing is that problems diminish with time on the whole. Again, I mean, massive, you know, generalization. Some problems get bigger and bigger and bigger. But on the whole, in daily business, our problems shrink over time. So give it time. Let everybody settle, the supplier, the customer, the team. Come back to it tomorrow, see where it is. If it's not solved then, come back to it a third day. And it just, at least in my experience, over that time, the problems, I'm not saying they solve themselves. We have to be active.
Yeah.
But they become more manageable because humans emote before we reason, right? We are emotional beings. So therefore, we respond with our automatic response, the automatic parts of our brain. And that conscious brain will respond in emotion, right? If you need to access the rational part of your brain that can really strategically think, you can't do it in the moment.
Yeah.
And from a neuroscience point of view, you actually can't do it. Because when you're in that state of stress, the problem feels huge. Your body is putting hormones into your body. So you have adrenaline and cortisol going through your body. You are literally draining from the brain the blood and the energy from the thinking parts, the prefrontal cortex, right? When that happens, no one can solve a problem. So this is why, I mean, that's, I guess, the science behind the instinct. When you've got a problem, give it time. Everybody will be able to solve it better once you've created that time.
Did it take you some time to learn to practice that? Or was it like super natural, super, straightforward for you? Because I think it's a practice, isn't it?
It is a practice. And I think it's also an experience/confidence thing, right? Because as I said, when you go back to that leader in the very beginning who told me about this comfort in silence, when you are young or a young leader or just a young member of a team, you want to speak, you want to prove your worth, you know? So yes, it takes time to practice that, to learn to listen, to learn to analyze a room, to understand body language, to have repeated experience of how people respond to things so that you can learn. And that learning is an openness, right? Open-mindedness. Many leaders never learn it. You know, you'll still come across hundreds of thousands of leaders that can't do it. They're still leading. They're still earning the big bucks, but they're just not any good with people. And until they overcome that, and maybe they won't, they never reach their full potential. They can do brilliantly. But them and their teams, in my belief, they will never reach their full capacity and potential because that human element is missing.
Interesting. And so it's, but now when you're advocating for empathy, so I was going to ask you actually another question first. So is this different in leading as an employed leader, leading for another brand, and leading for your own company. Is this different? Do you want to fix problems that are probably, within your own business, you want this to be fixed? Versus, for example, a big organization, a big brand, where you can give it time for people to fix. So how is it different?
I think it's different because the drivers are different, right? When you're in the corporate world, yes, you're leading because of your own passion, your own commitment, your own vision or goals, but you're also doing that under, obviously, the umbrella of somebody else's passion and vision and goals, because that's your job. Your job is to deliver for and on behalf of them and with them. As an entrepreneur leader, you have full freedom, right? That's probably the word, Lara. The difference between the two is the amount of freedom you have to lead and make decisions in the moment on behalf of other people without consequences. I would say in the entrepreneurial leadership role, you have higher levels of psychological safety, right? The only person you can really let down or feed back to is yourself, versus knowing, well, the global head of marketing might not like this. I'm going to do it anyway, but I have a feeling she's going to call me tomorrow and tell me I should have done it a different way. So I think the amount of freedom and the amount of safety that you have in the leader you want to be is definitely more in an entrepreneurial role. But of course, in the corporate world, you have all kinds of support systems. So you have many more people to assess decision-making and ask for advice and perhaps find mentorship. And you have a backup. Now, someone else is paying your salary unless you get fired, right?
Yeah.
However you lead, you're in a system, you're going to get paid. Someone's going to pay your health insurance. And in entrepreneurial decision-making, the stakes are in some ways much higher.
Yeah.
If you don't get it right, the only person that's going to suffer is you and the people you've hired. And that's your responsibility. So there is a higher sense of responsibility, for me at least, for the people that I'm responsible for. When I opened my own office recently, as in a physical office, and that decision making was not really based in me and what I wanted, but was it right for the business and is it right for my people? And adding that cost to my monthly costs and the location of that office and all of those things have a huge impact directly on the people that I've hired, right? So yeah, I think it comes with greater freedom, but also a higher risk when you're leading in the entrepreneurial space.
Are these two very, very important traits of a real leader, be it in a corporate world or entrepreneurial space? Do you think so. He has to be a risk taker?
I think so. I think not necessarily a risk taker, but I think that the psychological safety, the ability to know you can take risks is critical. And again, that goes straight back to psychology. We know, and actually there was a new paper out just last week around psychological safety in a surgeon's operating room, right? And the amount of decisions that surgeons are able to make when they are deep within surgery, saving somebody's life. And what the data shows is that where there's higher psychological safety, there is also improved leadership. Right? Because that surgeon in the moment can make the decisions that he or she believes are right to save this life or cure this person in the moment without fear of that judgment or repercussions to come. So I think risk-taking is a ripple effect from being able to make decisions, from having that, whether you call it freedom or psychological safety, that ability to do that. And all of the data shows me that is true. So yeah, I do believe that.
Is it something that can be practiced and developed, or is it something that people are usually born with, and then you recognize that ability in yourself and then you develop it in yourself? What do you think?
Yeah, psychological safety for sure is a cultural reality that can be built into businesses and is more and more all around the world now. So yes, the creation of safety in any work environment. So if you're in the corporate world, you want your leaders to take more decisions, to be bolder, to act in the moment, to respond better. You as a wider leadership team, as an HR team, as a cultural team, can create more psychological safety in the workplace, for sure. As a leader individual, again, I think it comes back to confidence and knowing, you said earlier, where you're going. You touched earlier on that I had a goal and I knew where I wanted to go. But I think even more importantly, I knew why. For me, being a leader by the time I was 30 was never about the title or the money. And in advertising, there's barely any money anyway. It was about being able to work with more people, being able to help people, being able to, and I learned that much later actually, that my driver is as a helper. And that's not in the absence of performance. I think that's really important, Lara, right? to be someone, to be a people-led leader, a human leader, to balance humanism and capitalism never means make less money. We're talking about making money. We're talking about growth. But we know that when you have connected leaders who listen to their team, who are engaged with their people, they see 23% higher profit. This is about both, right? And I always knew that.
That's that was one of my questions actually. So how do you balance between the empathy culture, which is obviously something that you're advocating and you're trying to bring in this conversation into the executive, into the corporate world, and we're going to talk about that right now. How do you balance between the empathy culture and the need for the high performance, the goals and the results? Yes.
I think it's as simple as recognizing the reality that well-led people perform better. As I said, 23% higher profit, 17% higher productivity, 64% higher engagement, 79% higher levels of loyalty. These are all statistics that are related directly to having leadership that is connected, empathetic, listening, understanding, right? So when people feel connected to people, they do better. They work longer hours, they stay more loyal, they are more able to innovate. So you see great impact. I think it's 68% higher levels of innovation as well, when those relationships are in place. So when you have leaders who are connected to their people, they are able to motivate their people, right? They are able to drive engagement because they know their people. And I'm not talking about knowing their personal lives or, what they do at the weekend, right? I'm talking about knowing how they perform their best, what they need to thrive in the workplace, how they are best set up to not self-censor, right? So to not hold back, to access the prefrontal cortex, the parts of their brain responsible for creativity and strategy and innovation, to be able to communicate. I mean, business is about people, right? So there is no debate, really. People-led leaders lead profit, lead productivity, lead output. And as I said earlier, I mean, there are situations where leaders will use power to create results. It will, right? There are 6 types of power. And within them, all of those forms of power will lead people to respond, right? Because they're power structures, whether that is fear, so maybe some type of aggression or violence, right? Or bullying in the workplace in the organizational sense, or it's status, or it's role, or it's title. That, as I said, there are 6 types of power. Power structures will lead to performance, but they won't be sustained in performance, right? So I often say to people, if someone came here now with a weapon and said, stop recording and leave, obviously we're gonna stop recording and leave, right? But once that fear has gone, we would go back to our lives, right? So under the pressure, under the power structure, you will perform, but that's what leads us to burnout in the end, right? So those leaders who say, I've worked 15, 20 years to get to this position. This is my prerogative. I have the office. You will do what I say because I'm saying so and I'm the boss. It will work for a time. But it is part of the problem that we have globally, where we talk about having an $8.8 trillion productivity gap. So annually, we are losing $8.8 trillion in lost productivity because our engagement is so low, right? People are what we call presenteeism. People are present. They're turning up at 9 and leaving at 5. They're doing their jobs. You can't fire them. They're delivering on their job description, but they are only delivering on their job description, right? So to me, this is where the leadership gap is. And that is what results in higher levels of burnout and exhaustion, disengagement, presenteeism, lack of communication and collaboration. Businesses are made up of people. However much AI and machine learning and technological interventions we have, we are still people at the end of the day, and people need people to survive.
In the high performance environments, like Dubai is, for example, because any type of business here in Dubai is literally dependent on the amount of money they're making out of this territory or out of all other territories. So which means to be able to sustain any business here in Dubai, you definitely need to implement that high performance culture where, I mean, I've seen like those sales driven teams, and the sales driven it's a machine driven team. Like the energy there is all about how many, let's say, calls, meetings, conversions. Conversions you've been able. How is this one go into balance with burnout, because it doesn't, you don't even think about, burning out. Of course you will burn out. So how challenging or maybe easy for you to hold that conversation about empathy and building a totally different culture here in Dubai? How is it working for you?
Look, I think that there is a reason that many, not all, but many sales-driven teams have high levels of turnover, right? High levels of attrition. Sales staff come, they reach their targets and they go. Salespeople at their core are driven generally by incentivization, right? So they are, like you said, they're reaching a goal, they're getting paid on commission. If they sell this many of X, they will get Y. So that is exhausting, right? And that is why salespeople, again, generally tend to shift and move and not stay very loyal in their jobs. They do it for a while, then they burn out, then they find another way to deliver. So having said that, there is huge amounts of organizational psychology that is connected to these same principles in order to drive sales results. Because again, people are led by people. So in the best sales-led organizations, it's when they have a very charismatic, very connected, very human-led leader who is able to drive them to achieve those objectives in isolation of simply doing it because you're going to get 6% versus 5% commission, right? It becomes sustainable over time. So that conversation is rising. To answer your question, how am I managing it? It's rising all the time. I have quite a lot of clients now where we work on sales-led training, things like call centers, how you engage with your customers. We know that from a sales point of view, the actual results point of view, you see higher levels of conversion, higher levels of lead generation when those customer service staff, those sales staff are trained to understand humans, right? They're trained to be able to hold a conversation that responds to the person on the other side of the phone. Same in real estate or anywhere where there's a broker industry. Those real estate agents, and there's many of them here in Dubai, right? But the star real estate agents around the city are the ones that have relationships with people, right?
Totally.
That can respond to what you need, that don't show you apartments that are off your brief because they just want to sell. That when you call them and say, I didn't like this one, but do you have something like this? They say to you, Lara, do you know what? You didn't ask me for this, but come with me, come and see this one because I think you're going to like it. So the leaders in this industry are the people that are using human understanding.
I absolutely agree with you. It doesn't eliminate, though, the fact that the real estate culture in Dubai is quite toxic.
Yeah.
And it's because of the race.
It's a race.
For commission, right? Yeah. And how to build that, let's say, how to implement that empathy culture that works not only for the client, but also because real estate agents are also people, right?
Well, we hope so. But yes, I think that you're right. It is a race. And if you look at evolutionary psychology and just what we need to survive, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in order to be anywhere near self-actualization, you have to, of course, be fed and homed and safe. Right, again, back to safety. You need to feel safe that you can pay your rent, that you can, support your families or buy your plane ticket home or whatever it is that you need, right? So the reason you get that constant toxicity is because of fear, right? They can't tell you that. If you ask an agent, are you scared? No, I'm not scared, right? But they are, right? Because that fear is, what if I don't get paid? What if I don't get the commission?
Yeah.
I've promised this to someone, or I owe this to my mum, or I need to send money back home, right? So that's why, it's not necessarily the sales process. It's that we have a huge number of agents in this city, and they're not necessarily trained in some of these skill sets. So in real estate in Dubai, we have such a huge variety of agents that come in, the brokers that come in with different levels of experience, some with none, some with a lot, from all different markets around the world. I mean, how people buy property in America versus Australia versus the UK versus South Africa, totally different relationship. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand, as you said, who these are as people and how to uplift them. But the problem is nobody wants to be responsible for that work, right? Because there's such a lot of attrition and because everybody's competing. So what it really needs is for someone to come in and say, I want to uplift the real estate industry as an industry.
Yeah.
right? But at the moment, it's very much driven by the brands and that sense
by
of
the
competition.
companies, yes, and you have to sustain your advertising, you have to sustain your team, etc. It's just because real estate is such a massive topic for Dubai. I'm really happy we just touched upon it, because it's probably the least associated with empathy.
Yes.
And it's interesting that we're talking about it. And you mentioned that you've already started doing some, not only for real estate, but I mean some sales trainings.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about that one, because I mean, as a leader. You as a leader, or other leaders who are leading the sales teams mostly, and they're probably getting a lot of education in terms of how to become more successful in sales, how to do more transactions, etc. And then you coming with your conversation about empathy. How do you integrate that? Does it take time to build this empathy culture, even within sales, and how long does it take to build it?
It definitely takes time, because people have to learn these skills. These are human relationship skills, right? But I often use the FBI as an example for how you teach it. So the FBI has a model called the behavioral change stairway. Okay? And they use this in hostage negotiation. So I often use it to explain to my audiences that empathy is a hard skill with hard results. And organizations like the FBI, who are working in the toughest of scenarios, are using it to change behavior. Fundamentally, what that model teaches us, that if you want to create any level of behavioral change, i.e. a sale, right, you have to first start with listening. Second, understanding or empathy. Third, rapport. That's your relationship that you have with your broker or with your real estate company. Fourth is going to be influence. I think you should see this apartment. I think you should see this development. There's a brand new tower coming up. Let me tell you about it. The fifth step is purchase, is behavior change, right? Is action. Okay? So I often use that to explain this. When we're talking about empathy in this case, this is not about being nice. It's not about being sympathetic. It's not about being kind. I mean, please be kind, but it's not about that. It's about giving people the skills to influence other humans, to understand them, and therefore be able to work with them, which is what leadership is about as well, right? Understand a diverse team and how different people respond to different environments. You know, we spend all our time talking about the importance of flexibility, but flexibility means like a million different things to a million different people. So leaders have to know what that means for their team and different parts of their team. Just like real estate agents need to know how to adapt their sales strategy. Lots of it sits in neurolinguistics, to be able to adapt their sales strategy to different people. Because somebody coming into Dubai to buy an apartment that doesn't live here, they're coming for a week, they want to invest, how you need to treat them and look after them, it's entirely different from someone who's lived here for 20 years and is looking to buy their third apartment. So that's how I would explain it to people.
Yeah,
right.
That's interesting.
These are human skills to drive human behavior, which starts with knowing the human, right? So
I love it. Yeah,
takes time.
I absolutely love it. And I think this conversation is probably so natural within all those sales-driven educations that everybody is probably delivering now. This is like a fresh air conversation. But what are the biggest challenges, let's say, you faced in having this conversation with executives, with some of the really high performance environments, sales driven environments? What are the biggest challenges and how do you overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge is that there is still a generation of people, and I'm not talking about old people, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much anyone over 40, who have come from training and backgrounds and careers where these skill sets were not taught, and therefore they carry less value. So the biggest challenge is overcoming the perception of these skills, right? You'll hear people talk about soft skills, right? I'm like on a mission, Lara, to tell the world they are not soft, right? There is nothing soft about them. These are hard skills that have hard impact. They're hard to master, they're hard to train, they're hard to learn. But when you get them right, you will see hard results. But there is a perception problem. Empathy has a perception problem, right? Which is that people think it's sympathy, people think it's kindness, people don't know what it is, but they say they don't care. The solution to that, I hope, is the work that me and other people in this space are doing, which is to give them the data. You know, I was here just a couple of weeks ago. I had 300 CHROs in a room, all from the Gulf, so a very local event. And I know when I walk on that stage, I can see them all looking at me thinking, oh, you know, what is this? I don't understand. Who is she? What's she talking about? Why is she talking about empathy? This was in the oil and gas industry, right?
Yeah.
Is there a role for empathy on an oil rig? But by the end, we had a standing ovation,
What was the turning point? What is your secret?
I think
to turn people believe you.
I think the secret is threefold. I think it's passion. I think passion is contagious. So when you talk with authentic passion, like not made up passion, but real passion, people are like, well, if she's passionate, maybe we should listen, right? I think the second is definitely data, right? So I use a statistic often that shows from Workplace Insider study that when employees are asked around empathetic leadership and performance, 93% of employees say, I want my leader to be empathetic, but that doesn't mean we should, struggle with performance. We should grow. Human beings want to grow, right? So 93%. So I use a lot of data. So they can't escape it by the end. So I start with passion. I use a lot of data to back that up. Somebody asked me on camera last week, Mimi, why do you believe? And in my answer, I said to her, this is not about me believing. I do believe that these skill sets are valuable in the workplace, but the reality is the data proves it. So I'm just a voice, right, for taking that data out. And then the third thing I think is intention. I think when people follow leaders who have intention, when they know that your intention is consistent, reliable, honest, authentic, that's such a cliche, people will follow that. So by the time you get to the end of that presentation, your keynote on a stage, people don't know, it's intangible. People just know that whatever you just did, I get it. Like I want to do that too.
Yeah.
So it's like this magical formula.
No, I like it. I like it. How do you, let's say, maintain the level of knowledge? Because we are in an era. So we're doing podcasts with you, right? So you consume podcasts yourself to educate yourself, like probably to maintain the level of knowledge and psychology, etc. So do you do that?
I do, not as much as I would like. I wish I could listen to more. I find I often don't get through a whole podcast, so I might go back to it, 2 or 3 times to finish it, like on taking my daughter to school or walking the dog or whatever. But I do also choose to live in a country. So I live in Kuala Lumpur, which has a slower pace as a city than somewhere like Dubai, right? And that is a very intentional shift because when I'm in Dubai, I literally never stop. And I come here often. I'm here every few weeks, right? And I often think if I lived here, I would probably never get out of either a podcast studio or off a stage. And that is so much fun. But to your point exactly, I would only ever have time to talk about what I already know. How would I ever know? How would I do my future work? Yeah. Right? I'm just writing my new book now. I just feel like I could never do it in a city like Dubai because people say New York never sleeps, but they've never been to Dubai, right? So for me, this city, there's just unbelievable energy and innovation and this attitude of if we can dream it, we can do it.
That's true.
For me as a creator, I have to leave to learn, to listen to podcasts, to read. I read a lot of reports. I do a lot of research, gather that all, and then come back and share it with people.
That's great. So you're doing your own show as well.
I am.
So, and it's an audio first show, correct?
It is, yeah.
So can you tell me a bit more about that? It's called Mimi You, which I think is really, really charming.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've had a podcast. This is my second podcast. I've had a podcast the last 5 years. I understand entirely why so many fail because it is so much hard work, right? You know, Lara, it's not just this moment of this conversation. It's everything that comes before and afterwards in curating your content, So I think that it's a passion for me. My show, as you said, is an audio only show. It's a show that's supposed to spread empathy with the world. So I want people to be able to listen in without any barriers or bias. I want to overcome unconscious judgment. And we all have unconscious judgment. Yeah. The minute you see someone, the minute, you guys see me, you have a judgment, whether you know it or not. And that show, I want it to be completely judgment free. I also want to create privacy and safety for the people dialing in, or joining me, I should say. So people will share stories that they don't want their boss to hear, or their husband to hear, or their family to hear. They want to tell stories about their identity, their passion, a trauma that they've been through without everybody knowing who they are. So it's more challenging for me because I don't have like beautiful video and loads of names I can tag. But it's also more authentic to the reason I'm doing that show, right? I want a platform that tells people's stories safely, that you can listen to and empathize with. You don't have to talk about empathy. You're able to practice it just by listening to the story of, and these are stories from all around the world. I don't interview like CEOs and VPs and stuff. I interview, women in Nigerian villages and different people so that you can stand in their shoes. Yeah. You can actually hear them explain. I had a woman recently from the Congo who was explaining me what it's like to leave her children. Her children were, I think, 11 and 14. And she said for their entire lives, Lara, every time she leaves them in the morning, she wonders whether she'll ever see them again. For 14 years, all right? So I want people to be able to listen to these stories and open their minds and their perspectives, because that's what empathy is, right? Perspective taking to those stories, and have a platform that does that. As I said, that makes it harder from like a podcast promotion point of view, but it's more authentic to the reason I'm using podcasting as a platform.
And I absolutely support that, because I think podcasting, from my experience, sometimes, yes, it's marketing and it's very strategic, but in a lot of cases, what really gets exposure is something that is super authentic in its core. And I think it couldn't be a video podcast.
Yeah, it's nice to hear you say that, because I feel that 99% of people tell me I can't or it won't work. Right. Not only is it audio, but it's anonymous. So when I speak to people, they're like, why are you doing that? Right. You are making your life so hard for yourself. But that's not the point. I'm not doing it to, in this case, I deeply believe in the power of podcasts as media platforms, as marketing platforms for businesses, for brands, for leaders. There is a huge role for that. It's just not my role. For me, on my leadership journey, on my empathy journey, this show is a storytelling show. And that's what it's meant to be. And maybe one day, millions of people will listen. Now it's a few thousand. That's fine. For the people that listen, they are impacted. And that's enough. Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest lessons, let's say, you've taken out of creating your own show as a leader as well?
I think the biggest lesson goes back to my very first point, which is I understand why so many people quit. Yeah. Right. Look at your face. You're like, yes, it's really hard work, right? In a really positive way, but maintaining a show. I think the data shows something like 70% only make it to episode 5 or something, right?
Or 10. Yes, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So my biggest learning is that it is, it's something you have to be very consistent about. You have to invest behind it. Yeah. Right. It costs money. However you do it, whether you're, in a beautiful studio, whether you're online, however you do it, it costs money. And I think I probably underestimated that in the beginning. So I had to learn that. And you need people around you. You can't do it on your own. Somebody has to edit and somebody has to help you with music. And, there's all those pieces. But I think also when people know you have a podcast, there is still a level of interest and intrigue. Oh, you're a podcast host. Tell me about that. How do you do that? There is still a lot of intrigue. In Dubai, we have so many. It is such a huge industry in Dubai, but it's not necessarily the same everywhere. So in many markets, this is still growing, still quite new. And I think, people are very intrigued by this as a media platform.
For sure. So do you think podcasting on its own, like, for example, if you're not producing your own show, but let's say you're listening to other shows, do you think this is a very impactful format for employees, for leaders, for, for people who are just consuming this content, not because of work or because of lives, let's say?
Yeah, I think so, Lara, because people follow people in all areas of business. And what podcasting allows you to do is form a relationship with somebody else that is leading in a different way or a different business or a different industry from you. So I think it's a highly influential platform. I think for people that do listen to audio only, it's often a very personal relationship, right? People will tell me, oh, I listen to you in my car, right? So you imagine that person's in their car in the traffic with me. Clearly I'm not there, right? But my voice is there, and that's a very personal relationship. Or people that listen to podcasts as they work out, they're running 10K, listening to their favorite podcast host. There is a relationship there. And when I meet people, they'll often tell me, oh, it's so nice to hear your voice in real life, because they build a relationship with your voice. And then for people that are watching video podcasts and maybe they're watching us right now on a platform somewhere, YouTube or wherever they're watching us today, they're building it's a content piece, right? It's like watching a documentary on Netflix. right? So I think that's why they're exploding so much, regardless of how you listen in or tune in to a podcast platform. There is a personal relationship, and that's why shows like Diary of a CEO are so utterly huge, right? Because people are having relationships with that show, like previously we did with, for example, with TV. So it's an entertainment platform, and it's booming.
And I think it also became so accessible for a lot of people to actually, tap into that movie industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I want to touch upon a very important topic as well. So you're also a public figure, right? You are somebody who is at the stage talking to the different audiences, which is a B2B, banking, government. You're talking to businesses as well. How have you become a public person, and why not everybody is doing that, right?
I think everybody can, first of all. I said earlier that my secrets to leadership were tenacity and patience, and I think that's how I've got here now. I also told you earlier that yesterday I had this epiphany when I was like, I'm in my flow, right? But those things have come from 5 years of doing this every single day, every day, right? Somebody asked me last week, how much time in your but your leadership work, leadership life, do you spend in content, social media? And I had to think about it. And I said, I suspect about 50 or 60% of my time is in creating some form of content, whether that's my next book, it's my workshops, it's online training, it's podcasting, it's social media content, right? I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and Instagram to create content of value that would drive me to reach more people. And of course, that for me is easy to do because my passion is to create more empathy in the world. And the only way to do that is to spread more empathy, right? So I believe that the more the world talks about empathy, the more empathy the world will have. So when it's lonely, when it's difficult, when it's expensive, when I feel like I'm talking to a black hole, that's what drives me. So I think the answer to how to do it is to, first of all, really know your why. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to be a public figure?
Yeah.
Why do you want to be a public figure? What do you want to be known for, right? Because if it's just, I don't know, to be famous, then that's probably not going to last very long, and sometimes people will write to me, the media or something, and they'll write influencer. And I will always write back and say, remove it immediately, right? I do not ever want to be an influencer, right? But what I do want to do is create content and I guess inspiration or training or teaching that can help other people reach their goals by connecting to other people. And so my why has been very clear for me from the beginning. And I get up every day. I mean, in the last month, I have been on 12, 13 flights, right? It's I feel like social media makes it look so easy and so glamorous. Yesterday I posted a film of me at a film shoot, and a young woman in India wrote to me and said, how can I do this too? And I don't have like an answer. I can't teach it to you tomorrow, Yeah. But I think purpose is really important. It's really overspoken about.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, that's what makes us human. We have to know why, because otherwise you run out of energy, I think.
I probably wanted to ask you, what would be the piece of advice you would give to the executives who probably know their why, but for some reason, maybe you can mention the reason as well. Why do you think they're not going public? They're not creating the media brands, let's say. They're not going into podcasting. What is the reason behind that? What do you think? What prevents a lot of great leaders from getting out their lessons, their leadership lessons out there, and how to help them?
Look, the first thing none of us can help them with, and that's time. I think the honest truth for many people is time. I think some leaders have started it and they give up. As I said, 50 or 60% of my time is doing this. That's
a lot. That's a lot of time. Yeah, I agree.
It's a lot of time. And I always talk about creating time versus having time. I have to create time to do that. And that is, for some people, I guess, unsustainable amounts of time that I'm investing into that. And, when you have a big corporate role, I mean, when are they supposed to find time to come to a podcast studio? I mean, they have meetings, Teams meetings from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., right? So I think the honest truth is time. And as I said, in creating time. But I think the second barrier is people feel, why would anyone want to hear from me? in their corporate safety net, we've spoken about safety a lot today, but they will stand up on the stage. So let's pretend they work for Microsoft. In that world, they're happy to stand on stage and talk about objectives and, culture and all the things that they're doing in, for example, Microsoft. But outside of that, they have a doubt as to why maybe anybody else would want to hear that.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is that the return on this type of investment is long-term. Some people are really lucky. They'll do one podcast show or one, video, and it will go viral for some reason and it will impact their lives forever. But the majority of us, we are slaving away a little bit every day or every week. And that's a really long-term investment. So that, again, goes back to the why. If you're a leader, they have to know really why they want to do that. What's the impact, whether that's more efficient financial processes, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be an emotional why. It can be a very functional or career-driven why.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think time is the first one. Self-belief is the second. And just having a really clear objective is probably the third. But like I said earlier, anyone can do it with the right training, the right time, and the right vision for where you're going.
Was it natural for you from day one?
No.
Did you have to?
Oh my gosh, no.
It's really very, very beneficial that you're saying so. Because you sound and look so natural.
Oh, thank you. But I love what I do. I mean, really, I love it so much. This doesn't feel like, work to me. And there's that very stereotypical phrase, when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, right? But it is actually true. It is actually true. But no, it wasn't always this easy. In the beginning, I knew I had to do it. I would cringe every time I saw my videos. When I heard my voice, I hated my voice, for so long.
I can't believe that one, by the way. I can't absolutely believe that one because the first minute I heard your voice, I'm like, oh, she must have been going through a training in public speaking or maybe acting. I even thought about acting.
Someone asked me that yesterday as well. But no, I hated my voice. I hated being on camera. And I had to learn, not necessarily how to do it. I was always quite good at speaking, but I had to learn the system around that. So creating the time to prepare, creating the time to have support systems around me, people that I trusted, and then just confidence. And still today, Lara, there's various things that I just won't do on social media. Do I know my growth journey would be shorter? The cycle to growth would be shorter if I did these things? Yeah, absolutely, especially in Dubai. I am not going to do them, right? So that's also a commitment from me. I don't want to do... There's many things I could do. I'm not talking about bad things. I'm just talking about different types of content that I know would help me get bigger faster.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do them. I'm going to do this professionally, systematically, authentically. That means speed. We'll slow down. But I always remind myself that this is a 10-year journey and not a 10-minute journey, right? So, but yes, it was not natural. I had to really learn. I had to practice. And still now my social media teams will ask me to do lifestyle content like making a cup of coffee or like walking past the swimming pool. And I'm like, oh no, guys, I can't. Like, I just can't. Like, ask me something about empathy and I'm fine. Ask me to pretend to get a Starbucks, then I find it really hard. So I think different people find different things hard.
No, thank you so much for mentioning that in our conversation. It's been an amazing, inspirational conversation. A lot about leadership, a lot about your own lessons out of it, which is absolutely amazing. We touched upon empathy as well, and we touched upon media, which is, I think, part of your journey as well.
So much. Yeah.
What do you want the audience to do at the end of it?
What do I want the audience to do? I want the audience, two things. I want the audience to believe in themselves, right? As we've said many times, whether you are a corporate leader or an entrepreneurial leader or an influencer, because I don't want to be one doesn't mean everybody else shouldn't, right? The opportunity is there. If you want to do this, if you want to create that journey and that vision, go ahead and create it. And the second thing I would just say is to really take away some of the data we spoke about today, that connected humans do better. Lonely humans do worse in all occasions. So however you create more connection, overcome loneliness, whether that's on podcasts, whether that's in the workplace as a corporate leader, as a mother, doesn't matter. Wherever it is you practice that. If we can all create more connection, I think the world will be a better place, and so will Dubai. So that would be my second one. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to have this conversation and just to have the opportunity to talk about leadership in our world.
Always great talking to you.